Joining me now is Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, host of the Fast Politics podcast, MSNBC political analyst as well, and, of course, Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee. And, of course, you know him as one of the co-hosts of the program that precedes this one, The Weekend. Airs right before Velshi, right here on MSNBC. Welcome to you, friends. Thank you for being here. Michael, you noted on X that Trump, quote, crapped the bed at NABJ, calling Trump a petulant ass. But his remarks, they were really meant for you and me. Or the audience in front of him. It was meant for his MAGA universe, although some people wonder what was that message and why.
Well, a lot of it is the way Donald Trump is looking at prosecuting this election. And this is one of the struggles between his current campaign team, which is a very sophisticated team of players. They have done a lot to get this campaign much better organized and focused on moving towards the goal of winning the election. Then Donald Trump has a different idea when he wants to put his daughter-in-law in charge of the RNC. They wind up firing people, and then he's still trying to pull it back in the direction he wants to go. And a good example of that was what we saw on the stage, where that was not the narrative his campaign team wanted to put out there, but it was the narrative Donald Trump wants to prosecute, because in his mind's eye, he needs more of his base to turn out. The idea of expanding the universe of people who are voting for him, that's too tiresome. That's way too involved. It's easier to get the people who love me and want to be with me and in my presence to come out and vote. So that's going to be a real challenge in some of these key battleground states. That's why the polling, folks, is so important to understand and not get tripped up on. Even when it's good for Harris right now, you can't get tripped up on what those numbers say, because it's not a reflection of who actually will vote. It's not a reflection of what the ground game is in any given state, in any given county, in any given district. And that's where the Democrats, as we talked about in our last hour, with Mr. Kinnaman, who's running that operation, have put the people in place. The Trump campaign have not. So when he's on that stage saying what he's saying, to your point, Ali, he's not talking about to folks to expand the number of people who will turn out. He's trying to make sure that his hardcore base turns out in a larger number.
Right, and that's where the enthusiasm part comes into this conversation. If people are enthused, that helps them to vote. And if groups of people are enthused, and Molly, this is interesting because Donald Trump's attacks on Kamala Harris are not landing for a couple of reasons. Some of them are just bad. They're just not that effective. And some of them are entirely turned around by this enthusiastic base of supporters of Kamala Harris, turned into memes and turned into things that cause people to get enthusiastic. That's the answer. I think Michael's point is right. Polls are always tight in this country with presidential races, or have been for many cycles now. The issue is going to come down to who wants to support who signs up to volunteer, who donates, and who comes out to vote.
Yeah, I also think one of the things about Harris, which we've seen before with Obama, is there's joy. And so he's trying to turn that joy against her. You know, those videos of her laughing, that was one attack, or her cooking. And I think people just like that. It's been a long, 8 years, 10 years since Trump came into the fray. And I think people are refreshed by just a normal person cooking a turkey. And so I do think that there is a kind of joy in this campaign that we haven't seen in a while in American politics. I also think that, people are galvanized for her. And Trump has only the same material. He just keeps recycling the same attacks. So a lot of the attacks he's using on her, he used on Hillary Clinton. And I think that you can't just keep using these same attacks. You got to think of something new.
Well, Michael, something you were talking about just moments ago, Eric Holder, the former attorney general, has arrived at the Naval Observatory, the vice president's official residence. He obviously is going to have his vetting papers, and they're going to have a very, very important conversation. So we're going to keep an eye on that. We'll see it in a moment. I want to ask you, Michael, about the mandate for leadership. You're familiar with this document because you were the head of the Republican Party. They've been putting this out since Reagan's days. It's a version of this, right? The idea that a conservative think tank like the Heritage Foundation would lay some sort of framework And in fact, it's usually been pretty successful with conservative administrations. There's the car that was carrying Eric Holder at the Naval Observatory. We're just looking at that. What's different about this Project 2025? What's different about this version of the mandate for leadership?
Well, okay. So what do you notice that's absent in those 900 pages? Any real formulation of policy that could be translated into congressional action on the environment, on the health care, on the economy, infrastructure, on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Beyond, okay, we need to get rid of the Department of Commerce. We need to get that's the economic plan. We need to get rid of the Department of Education. That's the education plan. We need to get rid of. We need to rename, Health and Human Services to the Department of Life, right? So you can see that transfiguration of these agencies, if they're not eliminated, into something to meet what is now the new mindset of this GOP, the MAGA mindset. When you go back and you look at what was written and what was said in the Reagan era, the Bush era, both Bushes, for example, yeah, there was this focus on the downsizing of government and so forth, but it was connected to other things that mattered, like 1,000 points of light, no child left behind. There were articulable policies that would also be a big part of that administration's work. That's not what's here. What's here is the wholesale grabbing of the federal government, giving it solely to the executive, right? Carving out Congress altogether. Doesn't really matter because Congress is nothing but a nod and a wink anyway, right? And this is where the power center is going to be. The courts have effectively done that now. I don't know if it was planned or this is just bad karma, the way this is aligned. But when the court said to Donald Trump effectively, all you need to do is claim it as an official act. You can do whatever you want to do, boo. We good. Right?
Yep.
That now put the imprimatur of power in the hands of this administration, which makes that document, those 900 pages you have, that much more deadly. That much more deadly. Because Donald Trump now can declare pretty much anything he wants in his term as an official act, and there's no way you can undo it, no way you can challenge it in court. It is what it will be. So those 900 pages mean more now than they did before the Supreme Court made its ruling.
And the other issue, Molly, and I find in circles people are talking about this much more. Maybe it's because I hold this up every time I can, and people like Michael talk about it on his show, and they have the necessary interviews. People need to know about this because the more they know about this, the more they want to run away from it. It's aside from being poorly written and hard to read, it's got all the stuff. And if you vote for a Republican in November, then you can't be mad next August when you say, I can't believe they did that. It's all written down here.
Yeah, and I think, look, it reads like stereo instructions for a reason, because it's not written to be readable, right? It's written because this is their plan. And I would say they gleefully say their plan is to dismantle the administrative state, which means all of the things that FDR did, the Department of Education, the gestalt of like having a federal government that takes care of people goes away. And that is their policy. And one of the reasons they don't talk about policy so much is because they know it's not very popular. I mean, these ideas, people don't want to lose Social Security. They don't want to lose their entitlements. And ultimately, that may not be exactly what the plan is, but it's moving in that direction.
Thanks to both of you. We appreciate it. Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent from Vanity Fair and MSNBC political analyst. Michael Steele, co-host of The Weekend here on MSNBC and former chair of the Republican National Committee. We love that you got us started off this morning. Thank you.